At the family dinner, my son's wife laughed and said, "You're nothing more than a luxury babysitter." The words hit me like ice water. Around the mahogany table I had inherited from my grandmother, surrounded by the fine china I had collected over decades of marriage, I watched my daughter-in-law's smug smile as she delivered what she thought was the final blow to my dignity. I didn't reply. I just placed the keys on the table and said, "Now the debt is entirely your responsibility." Can you imagine dedicating 30 years of your life to building something, only to have it dismissed as mere babysitting by someone who had never worked a day for what they enjoyed? What would you do if the family you sacrificed everything for treated you like hired help in your own home? I remained silent at that dinner table, but I already knew that by the next morning, my response would forever change the power dynamics in our family. What they didn't know was that those keys represented far more than they could imagine. My name is Juliette Davenport, and I am 63 years old. For 25 years, I was a senior partner at Morrison & Associates, one of the most respected law firms in Manhattan. I specialized in corporate restructuring and family wealth management. When my husband Charles passed away 4 years ago, I made the decision to retire early and dedicate myself entirely to my family. I thought I was choosing love over ambition. I was wrong. The dinner that night was supposed to be a celebration. My son Michael had just received a promotion at his marketing firm, and my daughter-in-law Sarah had insisted we celebrate at my penthouse apartment on the Upper East Side. The same apartment where Charles and I had hosted dozens of elegant dinners, where we had raised Michael, where I had dreamed of spending my golden years surrounded by grandchildren and family warmth. Sarah arrived wearing a designer dress I recognized immediately because I had bought it for her last Christmas. She swept through my living room with the confidence of someone who believed herself untouchable, admiring my art collection with the casual air of someone already mentally cataloging their inheritance. Michael followed behind her, carrying 3-year-old Emma and 5-year-old James, my grandchildren, whom I adored with every fiber of my being. During cocktails, Sarah made her first comment of the evening that should have warned me. "Juliette, darling," she said, while sipping the expensive wine I had selected from Charles's collection, "you really should consider downsizing. This place is far too big for just one person. And frankly, the maintenance costs must be astronomical." She laughed that crystalline laugh of hers, the one that always made me feel like I was missing some private joke at my own expense. Michael said nothing. He had been saying nothing for months now, I realized. When had my brilliant, loving son become this silent figure who simply nodded along with whatever Sarah declared? When had he stopped defending me, stopped seeing me as anything more than a convenient resource? The evening deteriorated rapidly from there. During dinner, Sarah began what I now understand was a carefully orchestrated performance. She spoke about their financial struggles with Michael's student loans, about how difficult it was to maintain their lifestyle in Brooklyn, about how they were considering private schools for the children, but simply couldn't afford them. All of this while sitting in my dining room, eating food I had prepared, drinking wine that cost more than most people's monthly grocery budget. Then came the moment that changed everything. Little James spilled his juice on my Persian rug, the one Charles and I had bought during our honeymoon in Istanbul. Sarah didn't apologize or offer to help clean it. Instead, she looked at me expectantly and said, "Well, Juliette, I suppose that's what grandmothers are for, right? Cleaning up messes and watching children so the real adults can handle important matters." That's when she delivered the final blow. "Let's be honest, you're nothing more than a luxury babysitter. You have no real responsibilities anymore, no important work to do. Your purpose now is to help us, to make our lives easier. And frankly, you should be grateful we let you be so involved with the children." The silence that followed was deafening. I looked at Michael, waiting for him to defend me, to show some spark of the son I had raised. Instead, he looked down at his plate and mumbled something about Sarah having a point about me having more free time now. That's when I understood. This wasn't just Sarah's cruelty. This was a coordinated effort. They had been discussing me, planning this conversation, treating me like a problem to be managed rather than a person to be respected. In that moment, sitting in my own home, surrounded by the life I had built, I realized I had become nothing more than a resource to be exploited. But Sarah had made a crucial miscalculation. She had forgotten that before I became a grandmother, Before I became a widow, before I became their convenient babysitter, I had been Juliette Davenport, the lawyer who had dismantled corporate empires and rebuilt family fortunes. She had forgotten that I hadn't just stumbled into wealth. I had created it, protected it, and strategically managed it for decades. As I stood up to clear the table, I made a decision that would change everything. I walked to my home office and retrieved a set of keys from my desk drawer. When I returned to the dining room, I placed them on the table next to Sarah's dessert plate. "These are the keys to the Brooklyn house," I said calmly. "The house where you've been living for the past 3 years. The house that's been in my name since the day you moved in. The house whose mortgage, taxes, utilities, and maintenance I've been paying without asking for a single dollar in return." Sarah's face went white. Michael suddenly looked up from his plate, his eyes wide with something that might have been fear. "From tomorrow morning," I continued, my voice steady despite the revolution happening in my chest, "all financial responsibilities for that house transfer to you. The mortgage payment is $3,800 monthly. Property taxes are due quarterly. I believe the next payment is $12,000, due in 6 weeks." I picked up my napkin, wiped my hands with deliberate care, and smiled the same professional smile I had used in boardrooms when delivering devastating news to overconfident opponents. "Since I'm nothing more than a luxury babysitter, I'm sure you won't need my financial assistance anymore. After all, real adults handle important matters themselves, don't they?" The power in the room had shifted completely, and everyone could feel it. But this was just the beginning. Sarah and Michael had no idea what they had just awakened. The next morning, I woke up at 5:30, as I had every day for the past 40 years. But this time, instead of my usual routine of checking on family finances and planning activities with my grandchildren, I made myself a cup of coffee and sat in Charles's favorite armchair to watch the sunrise over Central Park. For the first time in months, I felt something I had almost forgotten: the quiet satisfaction of being in complete control of my own life. My phone started ringing at 7:15. Sarah's name flashed on the screen. I let it go to voicemail. It rang again immediately, then again. By 8 o'clock, I had 12 missed calls and 7 increasingly frantic text messages. The last one read, "Juliette, we need to talk. There's been a misunderstanding." There had been no misunderstanding. For the first time in years, everything was crystal clear. I decided to take a walk through the Metropolitan Museum of Art, something I hadn't done for pleasure in far too long. As I strolled through the Egyptian wing, admiring artifacts that had survived thousands of years, my phone buzzed with a call from Michael. This time, I answered. "Mom, what the hell happened last night?" His voice was tight with panic. "Sarah says you're kicking us out of the house?" "I'm not kicking anyone out, Michael. I simply transferred the financial responsibility for the house to the people who live in it. Isn't that what adults do? Handle their own important matters?" There was a long pause. I could hear Sarah's voice in the background, sharp and urgent, though I couldn't make out the words. "Mom, you know we can't afford that mortgage payment. Sarah she was having a bad day. She didn't mean what she said." "Oh, but I think she did mean it, darling. In fact, I think it was the most honest conversation we've had in years. Your wife made it very clear that my role in this family is to provide services while expecting nothing in return. I'm simply adjusting my contributions to match my newly defined position. This is insane. I can't just what, Michael? Make decisions about my own property, my own money? I spent 25 years as a lawyer specializing in exactly these kinds of arrangements. Trust me, I know precisely what I can and cannot do." The silence on the other end told me everything I needed to know. They had never actually considered me a person with agency, with rights, with the power to say no. I had been so generous, so accommodating, so eager to be the perfect grandmother and mother-in-law that they had forgotten I was anything more than a convenient resource. That afternoon, I did something I hadn't done in years. I called my former assistant, Patricia, who now worked as a private investigator specializing in financial fraud cases. We had remained friends after my retirement, though I had been too busy playing grandmother to maintain the relationship properly. "Juliette, what a wonderful surprise. How are you handling retirement?" "Actually, Patricia, I think retirement might be ending sooner than expected. I need to ask you a favor, and it might be the beginning of a very interesting project. I explained the situation briefly, focusing on the facts rather than the emotions. Patricia listened with the professional attention that had made her so valuable during my legal career. So you want me to conduct a comprehensive financial investigation of your son and daughter-in-law? I want you to help me understand exactly what I've been paying for and what they've been doing with the money I haven't been paying for. Call it due diligence on my own family investments. 3 hours later, Patricia called me back with preliminary information that made my blood run cold. Juliette, you're going to want to sit down for this. I've just done a basic credit and financial background check on Michael and Sarah. The Brooklyn house isn't their only financial obligation that you've been covering. She began reading from her notes, and with each item, I felt pieces of a puzzle clicking into place. The credit cards I had paid off last Christmas weren't just holiday overspending. They were part of a pattern that went back years. The emergency car repair I had funded in September was actually a down payment on Sarah's new BMW. The unexpected medical bills from last spring were cosmetic procedures, but the most shocking revelation was still coming. There's something else, Juliette. I found some interesting activity in Sarah's financial records. She's been receiving regular payments from an account registered to something called DS Consulting. Have you ever heard of that company? I hadn't, but I was going to find out everything about it. Patricia, I want you to do a complete forensic financial investigation. I want to know every source of income, every expense, every debt, every asset. I want to understand exactly how my money has been used and what other money has been coming into their household. That kind of investigation takes time and resources, Juliette. It won't be cheap. I almost laughed. After 4 years of covering their expenses without question, after decades of building and managing wealth, she was warning me about costs? Patricia, money is not an issue. Time, however, might be. How quickly can you have a preliminary report? Give me 48 hours for the basics, a week for the comprehensive analysis. As I hung up the phone, I realized that the anger I had felt last night had transformed into something far more dangerous: professional curiosity. Sarah had made the mistake of challenging someone who had spent her career unraveling financial deceptions and family secrets. She had forgotten that before I became a grandmother, I had been very, very good at my job. My phone rang again, Sarah's name on the screen. This time, I answered on the first ring. Hello, Sarah. Juliette, thank God. Listen, I think we got off on the wrong foot last night. I was stressed about money, and I said some things I didn't mean. Can we please just forget about this whole thing with the house keys? Her voice was honey-sweet now, all traces of last night's arrogance carefully erased. It was a masterful performance, and it might have worked on the woman I had been yesterday. But that woman had died somewhere between the luxury babysitter comment and the sunrise this morning. Of course we can discuss it, dear. Why don't you and Michael come over this evening? Around 7? I think it's time we had a real conversation about family finances and responsibilities. Oh, wonderful. I knew you'd understand. You're such a reasonable person, Juliette. We'll bring the children, and maybe we can order in from that Italian place you love. Actually, let's make it just the adults this time. I think Emma and James have heard enough grown-up conversations lately, don't you? There was a slight pause, the first crack in her confident facade. Of course, just the adults. We'll see you at 7. As I hung up the phone, I walked to my home office and opened the safe where Charles and I had kept our most important documents. Behind the insurance papers and investment portfolios, I found what I was looking for: a file labeled Family Trust Documentation that I hadn't touched since Charles's funeral. It was time to remind myself exactly what assets were truly under my control and what leverage I actually possessed. Sarah and Michael thought they knew Juliette the grandmother. Tonight, they were going to meet Juliette the lawyer. And tomorrow, when Patricia's report arrived, they were going to discover that their luxury babysitter had been paying much closer attention than they had ever imagined. At exactly 7 o'clock, Michael and Sarah arrived at my apartment. I watched them through the security monitor as they stood in the lobby, Sarah adjusting her hair and checking her reflection in the marble walls, while Michael shifted nervously from foot to foot. They had no idea they were walking into what would become the most important business meeting of their lives. I had spent the afternoon preparing for this conversation with the same methodical precision I had once used to prepare for hostile corporate takeovers. Every document was organized, every fact verified, every question strategically planned. The dining room table was set not for dinner, but for negotiation, with 3 leather portfolios positioned at precise intervals and a digital recorder placed conspicuously in the center. When they entered, Sarah was wearing her most expensive jewelry and her brightest smile. "Juliette, darling, you look wonderful. I brought those photographs of Emma's dance recital that you wanted to see." "How thoughtful. Please, have a seat." I gestured to the chairs across from me, maintaining the professional courtesy that had served me well in countless boardroom confrontations. Before we discuss family matters, I thought it might be helpful to review some financial documentation together. Michael's face went pale. "Mom, is that really necessary? Can't we just work this out as a family?" "We are working this out as a family, sweetheart. It's precisely because we're family that we need to ensure complete transparency in our financial arrangements." I opened the first portfolio and removed a stack of bank statements. "These are records of every payment I've made on your behalf over the past 4 years. The total comes to $647,000. Sarah's carefully constructed smile faltered. That seems like a lot." "It is a lot. Would you like me to break it down by category?" I didn't wait for an answer. "Mortgage payments, $238,000. Property taxes, $46,000. Utilities, $18,000. Car payments and insurance, $32,000. Credit card payments, $89,000. Emergency expenses, $67,000. Educational expenses for the children, $28,000. Miscellaneous family support, $129,000. With each number, I watched Michael sink deeper into his chair. Sarah, however, was beginning to show signs of the calculating intelligence that had attracted my son in the first place. She was trying to find an angle, a way to reframe this conversation to her advantage. "Juliette, we never asked you to keep track of every penny. Family helps family. That's what love means." "You're absolutely right, Sarah. Family does help family. And love often expresses itself through financial support. But what puzzles me is why family members who have received $647,000 in assistance would describe the person providing that assistance as nothing more than a luxury babysitter." The room fell silent, except for the soft ticking of the antique clock Charles had bought me for our 20th anniversary. "Furthermore," I continued, opening the second portfolio, "I've been wondering about something. If you're struggling financially to the extent that you require this level of support, how did you manage to afford certain luxury purchases?" I removed a series of photographs that Patricia had provided. This BMW, for instance, purchased 8 months ago for $43,000. This vacation to Tuscany last summer cost approximately $18,000. These renovations to your kitchen, contractor estimates suggest around $25,000. Sarah's composure was beginning to crack. Where did you get these photographs?" "I'm a lawyer, dear. Well, a retired lawyer, but some skills never fade." I leaned back in my chair, studying their faces with the same analytical attention I had once focused on opposing counsel. "The question that interests me is this. If you can afford $43,000 cars and $18,000 vacations, why do you need me to pay your mortgage?" Michael finally found his voice. "Mom, you're making this sound like some kind of fraud. We never lied to you about anything." "Didn't you? Tell me, Michael, what exactly is DS Consulting?" I watched Sarah's face drain of all color. It was the reaction of someone who had just realized their most carefully guarded secret had been exposed. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, but her voice had lost all its earlier confidence. "DS Consulting has been paying Sarah $4,000 monthly for the past 18 months. That's $72,000, almost exactly enough to cover your mortgage payments during that same period." I removed another document from the portfolio. According to state business registration records, DS Consulting is owned by one David Sterling. According to my research, David Sterling is a real estate developer who has been married for 23 years to a woman named Linda. They have 2 teenage children. Sarah was no longer trying to maintain her facade. She was staring at the table, her hands clenched in her lap. "So let me understand the situation clearly," I continued, my voice maintaining the same professional calm that had terrified corporate executives for decades. You have been receiving regular payments from a married man totaling $72,000. During this same period, you have been telling me that you're struggling financially and need help with basic expenses. Is that an accurate summary? It's not what you think, Sarah whispered. Then please, enlighten me. What should I think when I discover that my daughter-in-law is receiving secret payments from a married man while simultaneously claiming financial hardship to justify my support? Michael looked like he might be sick. Sarah, what is she talking about? Who is David Sterling? For the first time since I had known her, Sarah looked genuinely vulnerable. The polished, confident woman who had insulted me in my own home was gone, replaced by someone who suddenly understood that her carefully constructed world was collapsing. David Sterling he is a client. I've been doing consulting work for his company. What kind of consulting work? I asked. Marketing, social media strategy, business development. I see. And this consulting work requires you to meet with Mr. Sterling personally, often? Perhaps during times when you've told Michael you were shopping or visiting friends? The silence stretched so long I could hear the elevator moving in the building shaft. Sarah. Michael's voice was barely a whisper. Please tell me this isn't what it sounds like. But I wasn't finished. There was one more revelation that would complete the picture. One more piece of information that Patricia had uncovered that would demonstrate just how completely they had both underestimated me. There's something else you should both know, I said, opening the third portfolio. Yesterday, after our dinner conversation, I contacted my attorney to review the family trust documents that Charles and I established years ago. It seems there are some provisions you might not be aware of. I removed a legal document and placed it in front of them. According to the terms of the trust, any family member who receives financial support from the trust while simultaneously deceiving other family members about their true financial situation forfeits all future claims to trust assets. Sarah's head snapped up. What does that mean? It means, dear, that your behavior over the past 18 months hasn't just cost you my financial support. It's cost you your children's inheritance. Every penny that would have gone to Michael and his descendants will now be redistributed according to the trust's alternate provisions. Michael stood up so quickly, his chair fell backward. Mom, you can't be serious. You can't punish the children for what Sarah has done. I'm not punishing anyone, Michael. I'm simply following the legal terms that your father and I established to protect our family's wealth from exactly this kind of deception. I stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights. Charles always said that money reveals character. He insisted we include these provisions specifically to ensure that our legacy would only benefit family members who demonstrated honesty and integrity. When I turned back to face them, Sarah was crying. But they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of rage and fear, the tears of someone who had just watched their carefully planned future disappear. You can't do this to us, she said through gritted teeth. We'll fight this. We'll contest the trust. I smiled the same smile I had used when opposing lawyers threatened to challenge my cases. Please do. I'd welcome the opportunity to present all of this evidence in court, including the nature of your relationship with David Sterling. I'm sure his wife Linda would be very interested in attending those proceedings. The education was complete. They finally understood who they were dealing with. Not a lonely grandmother desperate for their approval, but a woman who had spent decades protecting wealth and family interests from people exactly like them. Now, I said, returning to my seat, shall we discuss the terms under which you might be able to remain in the Brooklyn house? Because despite everything, I do love my grandchildren, and I have no intention of making them homeless. But the days of free housing and unquestioned financial support are over. From now on, everything comes with conditions, contracts, and consequences. The real negotiation was about to begin, and for the first time in years, I held all the cards. The silence that followed my ultimatum stretched for nearly 5 minutes. Sarah sat frozen, mascara creating dark trails down her cheeks, while Michael stared at the legal documents as if they might somehow transform into something less devastating. I used the time to study them both, cataloging their reactions with the same attention to detail that had made me formidable in depositions. Finally, Michael spoke. What kind of conditions? Before we discuss terms, I need complete honesty about the David Sterling situation. I need to understand exactly what kind of relationship we're dealing with, because that will determine how we move forward." Sarah looked up at me with eyes full of defiance, mixed with desperation. It started as legitimate consulting work. David's company was expanding into social media marketing, and they needed someone with experience in luxury brand positioning. I had done some freelance work before Emma was born. And when did it become something other than consulting? She glanced at Michael, then back at me. "About 6 months ago. But it's not what you think. I'm not having an affair. David and we have feelings for each other, but we've never acted on them physically." Michael's chair scraped against the floor as he turned to face his wife fully. "Feelings? What kind of feelings?" "The kind that make you question everything about your life," Sarah whispered. "The kind that make you realize you might have married the wrong person." The honesty was brutal and necessary. I had seen enough divorces in my legal career to recognize the signs of a marriage that was already over in everything but paperwork. But there were children involved, and my grandchildren's welfare was not negotiable. "I appreciate your honesty, Sarah. Now I need to know, are you planning to leave Michael for David Sterling?" "I don't know. David's situation is complicated. His wife doesn't know about me, and he has children to consider. We've been trying to figure out how to handle everything without destroying multiple families, while accepting $72,000 from him and lying to your husband about your financial needs." Sarah's face flushed with anger. "You don't understand the pressure I've been under. Michael's job barely covers our basic expenses. I felt trapped, like I was drowning in this life that I never really chose. David offered me work, offered me money, offered me a way to feel valuable again." I turned to Michael, who was staring at his hands. "And you? What's your perspective on this marriage? I thought we were happy. I thought we were building something together. I had no idea Sarah was so miserable." His voice was hollow, defeated. "I've been working 60-hour weeks trying to get promoted, trying to build a future for our family. I thought the financial stress was temporary. But you were comfortable accepting my financial support indefinitely?" "No. Yes. I don't know. You offered to help, and we needed help. I didn't think it was wrong to accept it." "It wasn't wrong to accept help, Michael. It was wrong to accept help while lying about your true financial situation and treating me like hired staff." I walked to my desk and retrieved a file I had prepared that afternoon. "Here's what's going to happen. I'm going to offer you both 2 options, and you have 48 hours to decide which path you want to take." I placed 2 separate contracts on the table. Option 1, divorce proceedings managed through my legal contacts with a structured financial arrangement that ensures the children's stability and education. Sarah, you would receive a settlement that allows you to start fresh, but you would sign agreements regarding custody and future financial claims against family assets. Michael, you would have primary custody and continued support for housing and child-related expenses, contingent on your meeting specific conditions regarding employment and financial responsibility. Sarah picked up the first contract with shaking hands. "What kind of settlement?" "Enough to rent a comfortable apartment in a good school district and support yourself for 2 years while you establish whatever career path you choose. But no claims on the trust, no future financial support from me, and structured visitation with Emma and James." "And if we choose to work on our marriage?" Michael asked. Option 2, marriage counseling with Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell, whom I've already contacted and who has agreed to take you as clients. Complete financial transparency going forward, with monthly reviews and budgeting assistance. Sarah ends all contact with David Sterling immediately and returns every penny of the consulting fees. You both sign agreements acknowledging the true terms of my support and agreeing to specific behavioral and financial conditions. I sat back down and folded my hands. There is no option 3 where you continue as you have been. That version of our family relationship died last night at dinner. Sarah looked up from the contract. "You've really thought this through, haven't you?" "I've had 4 years of retirement to observe and analyze, Sarah. 4 years of watching my son become a shadow of himself while his wife built a secret life funded by my generosity. Did you really think I wouldn't eventually notice? I never meant for things to get so complicated. But they did get complicated, and now we have to deal with the consequences." I leaned forward, allowing some warmth back into my voice for the first time that evening. "I need you both to understand something. I love Emma and James more than my own life. I will not allow them to be casualties of adult poor judgment. Whatever you decide, their welfare comes first. Michael finally looked up at me. Do you think our marriage can be saved? That's not my decision to make, sweetheart. But I think you both need to decide who you really are and what you actually want before you can answer that question. My phone buzzed with a text message. Patricia, need to speak with you urgently. New information about DS Consulting. Call me when you're free. I glanced at the message and made a decision. There's something else you should know before you make your choice. I'm expecting additional information about David Sterling and his business within the next 24 hours. Depending on what that information reveals, your options might change. Sarah's face went white again. What kind of information? The kind that comes from a thorough investigation into someone's business practices and personal life. The kind that reveals whether David Sterling is the kind of man you want to build a future with, or the kind of man who represents a danger to my family. I stood and began collecting the documents. You have 48 hours to review these contracts and make your decision. During that time, I suggest you have some very honest conversations with each other. And Sarah, I strongly recommend you consider whether your feelings for David Sterling are worth potentially exposing yourself and my grandchildren to whatever Patricia is about to tell me about his true character. As they prepared to leave, Michael turned back to me. Mom, regardless of what we decide, I owe you an apology. You didn't deserve to be treated the way we treated you. No, I didn't. But what I deserve and what I accept are two different things. I accepted disrespectful treatment because I was afraid of losing my family. But I've learned something important. A family that only values you for what you provide isn't worth keeping. After they left, I immediately called Patricia. Juliette, thank God. I've been digging deeper into David Sterling's background, and you need to know what I found. DS Consulting isn't just a real estate development company. It's been under investigation by the State Attorney General's office for the past 8 months. My blood ran cold. What kind of investigation? Money laundering, tax evasion, and fraud. It looks like Sterling has been using his consulting business to hide income and move money through various shell companies. The payments to Sarah? They might be part of a larger scheme to distribute funds to avoid detection. I sat down heavily in Charles's chair. Are you telling me that Sarah might unknowingly be involved in criminal activity? I'm telling you that she's been receiving regular payments from a company that's actively under federal investigation. Whether she knows it or not, she could be considered a participant in whatever Sterling has been doing. Suddenly, the stakes had changed completely. This wasn't just about family betrayal and martial problems anymore. This was about protecting my grandchildren from potential legal consequences that could follow their mother for years. Patricia, I need everything you can find about this investigation, and I need it tonight. The education of Sarah and Michael was about to become far more complicated than any of us had imagined. I spent the entire night reviewing Patricia's findings, each document more disturbing than the last. By dawn, I understood that what I had initially perceived as a simple case of marital infidelity and financial deception was actually something far more dangerous. David Sterling wasn't just cheating on his wife and manipulating my daughter-in-law. He was potentially using Sarah as an unwitting accomplice in a sophisticated money laundering operation. At 6 a.m, I called my former colleague, District Attorney Margaret Chen, who had been a close friend since our law school days at Columbia. Margaret had always been an early riser, and I knew she would be preparing for her day. Juliette, it's been far too long. How are you handling retirement? Margaret, I need a professional consultation, and it can't wait. Are you familiar with an ongoing investigation into DS Consulting and David Sterling? There was a pause, the kind that told me I had just entered very serious territory. That's an active federal case. Why are you asking? Because my daughter-in-law has been receiving regular payments from Sterling's company for the past 18 months, and I have reason to believe she has no idea what she's gotten herself involved in. Juliette, we need to meet. Today. This conversation cannot happen over the phone. 3 hours later, I sat in Margaret's downtown office, surrounded by law books and case files, feeling more like my old self than I had in years. Margaret listened to my explanation with the focused attention that had made her one of the most respected prosecutors in the state. Your daughter-in-law is in serious trouble, Juliette. The Sterling investigation involves at least $12 million in suspicious transactions over the past 3 years. The consulting payments to various individuals like Sarah appear to be a method of distributing funds to avoid detection and create false paper trails. What are the potential charges? For Sterling? Money laundering, tax evasion, wire fraud, and conspiracy. For the people receiving the consulting payments? That depends on what they knew and when they knew it. If Sarah can prove she believed the work was legitimate, she might avoid criminal charges. But she'll certainly face civil asset forfeiture for any money she received. My hands were steady as I took notes, muscle memory from decades of legal practice taking over. What's the timeline on this investigation? Federal agents are planning to execute search warrants and make arrests within the next 2 weeks. Anyone who received payments from DS Consulting will be contacted by investigators. I thought about Emma and James, sleeping peacefully in their beds, unaware that their mother's poor judgment might destroy their family in ways far worse than divorce. Margaret, if someone were to come forward voluntarily with information about their involvement before the arrests happen, how would that affect their legal situation? Cooperation always matters in federal cases. Someone who voluntarily provides information and demonstrates they were genuinely deceived would be treated very differently than someone who tries to hide their involvement. As I left Margaret's office, I made a decision that would either save Sarah from criminal prosecution or confirm that she was far more calculating than I had given her credit for. I was going to offer her one last chance to tell the complete truth, but this time with federal prosecutors listening. That afternoon, I called Sarah and asked her to meet me alone. No Michael, no children, just the two of us having what might be the most important conversation of her life. We met at a small cafe in Greenwich Village, far from our usual Upper East Side haunts. Sarah arrived looking haggard, her usual polished appearance replaced by the hollow-eyed exhaustion of someone who hadn't slept. "Juliette, I've been thinking about what you said last night, about the contracts and the choices. I think I'm ready to discuss option 1, the divorce settlement. Before we talk about your future, Sarah, I need to ask you some very specific questions about David Sterling and DS Consulting. Your answers will determine not just your relationship with this family, but potentially your freedom." Her face went pale. "What do you mean, my freedom?" I leaned across the table, keeping my voice low and controlled. DS Consulting is under federal investigation for money laundering and fraud. The consulting payments you received are being examined by federal prosecutors as part of a criminal conspiracy. You have approximately 10 days before federal agents execute search warrants and begin making arrests. Sarah's coffee cup fell from her hands, shattering on the cafe floor and drawing stares from other patrons. "That's impossible. David's business is legitimate. He showed me contracts, client lists, project proposals, documents that are apparently fabricated as part of an elaborate scheme to hide the true source and destination of millions of dollars." I handed her a tissue from my purse. "The question is, did you know the business was fraudulent, or were you genuinely deceived?" I had no idea. "You have to believe me, Juliette. I thought I was doing marketing work. David showed me social media campaigns, website designs, client testimonials. Everything seemed completely legitimate. Then you need to prove that to federal investigators before they conclude you were a willing participant." For the first time since I had known her, Sarah looked genuinely terrified rather than merely inconvenienced. "What do I need to do?" "You need to voluntarily contact the federal prosecutors handling this case and provide complete information about your relationship with Sterling and your understanding of the work you were doing. You need to turn over every document, every email, every record of communication. And you need to do it immediately. Will that keep me out of prison? It will demonstrate that you were deceived rather than complicit. Combined with your cooperation, it should result in civil penalties rather than criminal charges. But Sarah, if you lie or try to hide anything during this process, you will go to prison. Federal prosecutors don't negotiate with people who continue to deceive them." She was crying now, real tears of fear and regret. "I never meant for any of this to happen. I just wanted to feel important again, to feel like I was contributing something valuable. I understand that. But your choices have put my grandchildren at risk of having their mother taken away from them. That is not acceptable." I reached into my purse and removed a business card. "This is the number for Margaret Chen. the district attorney who's coordinating with federal prosecutors on this case. You're going to call her this afternoon and arrange to meet with investigators tomorrow morning. What about Michael? What about the children? That depends entirely on how this investigation resolves. If you cooperate fully and can demonstrate that you were genuinely deceived, we'll proceed with option 1 from last night's conversation. Divorce, settlement, structured custody arrangement. The children will be protected, and you'll have a chance to rebuild your life. And if the investigators don't believe me, then my grandchildren will visit their mother in federal prison, and I will spend whatever resources necessary to ensure they never have to live with the shame of your choices. Sarah looked at me with something that might have been respect mixed with fear. You really would do that, wouldn't you? You'd destroy me to protect them. Without hesitation. But I'd rather help you save yourself if you're genuinely willing to tell the truth and accept responsibility for your mistakes. I stood to leave, then turned back for one final warning. Sarah, when you meet with the federal prosecutors, remember that they will already know more about your situation than you realize. They will have David Sterling's financial records, his communication logs, possibly even recordings of conversations. The only thing that will save you is complete honesty about what you knew and when you knew it. As I walked away from the cafe, I called Michael. Sweetheart, I need you to bring Emma and James to stay with me for a few days. There are some adult situations that need to be resolved, and I want to make sure the children are in a stable environment while we handle them. Is this about the contracts you showed us last night? It's about something much more serious than marriage problems, Michael. I'll explain everything once the children are safely here with me. The next 48 hours would determine whether Sarah was a victim of sophisticated manipulation or a willing participant in criminal activity. Either way, I was going to make sure that whatever consequences followed, my grandchildren would be protected from the chaos their parents had created. The investigation that had begun with hurt feelings and family betrayal was about to become a federal case with consequences that would reshape all our lives. But for the first time in days, I felt the familiar satisfaction of being in control of a complex legal situation. David Sterling had made the mistake of underestimating the grandmother of the woman he was using. That mistake was about to cost him everything. Emma and James arrived at my apartment that evening with their overnight bags, chattering excitedly about having a sleepover with Grandma Juliette. As I helped them settle into the guest room that I had always kept ready for their visits, I felt the weight of protecting their innocence from the storm that was about to engulf their family. After tucking them into bed with stories and warm milk, I returned to my home office to prepare for what would essentially be a war council. Patricia arrived at 9 o'clock sharp, carrying 3 thick folders of additional research. Margaret Chen joined us via secure video call from her home office, and my longtime attorney, Robert Fitzgerald, participated by conference phone from his vacation in Martha's Vineyard. Before we begin, Margaret said, her face serious on the laptop screen, I need everyone to understand that what we discuss tonight is covered by attorney-client privilege, but we're dealing with an active federal investigation. Juliette, your family's cooperation could be crucial to the success of this case. Patricia opened the first folder. I've spent the past 24 hours conducting a comprehensive investigation into David Sterling's operation. What we're looking at is far more sophisticated than simple money laundering. Sterling has been running a multi-layered scheme involving real estate fraud, tax evasion, and what appears to be funding for offshore gambling operations. She spread out a complex organizational chart showing the connections between DS Consulting and at least 15 other shell companies. The consulting payments to individuals like Sarah weren't just about hiding money. They were creating false employment records that Sterling's associates could use to justify income for loan applications and tax returns. Robert's voice crackled through the speakerphone. Juliette, if Sarah was unknowingly providing legitimacy to loan fraud schemes, the civil liability alone could be devastating. We need to protect your family's assets from any potential claims. That's already been handled, I replied. I've restructured the trust to ensure that Sarah has no claims against family assets, and Michael's portion is protected in a separate vehicle that can't be touched by any legal consequences from Sarah's involvement. Margaret leaned forward on the video call. There's something else you need to know. Federal agents executed search warrants on Sterling's offices this morning. They found evidence of communications with at least 23 individuals who received consulting payments. Sarah's name appears in multiple documents. My blood ran cold, but my voice remained steady. What kind of documents? Email chains discussing payment schedules, false project descriptions, and instructions on how to respond if questioned about the work. The problem is that some of these emails suggest that several recipients, possibly including Sarah, knew more about the true nature of the arrangement than they've admitted. Patricia removed another document from her folder. This is where it gets complicated for Sarah. I found records of a dinner meeting between her and Sterling from 3 months ago, where, according Sterling's calendar notes, they discussed expanding the arrangement and bringing in additional participants. If Sarah knew she was part of a recruitment scheme, her legal exposure increases dramatically. I studied the document, my legal mind automatically analyzing the implications. Do we know if Sarah actually recruited anyone else? That's what we need to find out before she meets with federal prosecutors tomorrow. Because if she brought other people into this scheme, cooperation might not be enough to avoid criminal charges. I made a decision that would either protect my family or expose us to additional risk. I'm going to call Sarah right now and conduct a preliminary interview. Margaret, I need you to listen to this conversation and advise me if she says anything that changes her legal situation. Sarah answered on the second ring, her voice thick with anxiety. Juliette, is everything okay? How are the children? The children are fine and asleep. Sarah, I need to ask you some very specific questions, and I need you to answer them completely and honestly. Margaret Chen is listening to this conversation, and your answers will determine how we proceed tomorrow. There was a long pause. Is this some kind of legal interrogation? This is your chance to tell the truth before federal agents ask you the same questions in a much less comfortable setting. Did you ever recruit other people to receive consulting payments from David Sterling? Recruit? What do you mean? Did you introduce other people to David as potential consultants? Did you recommend friends or acquaintances who might benefit from similar arrangements? Another pause, longer this time. He asked me if I knew anyone else who might be interested in marketing work. I mentioned a few people from my book club who had professional backgrounds. Margaret's face on the video screen showed immediate concern. I pressed forward. How many people, Sarah? And did any of them end up receiving payments from DS Consulting? 3 or 4 people. I'm not sure if any of them actually got hired. David said he would reach out to them directly. Patricia was already pulling up another document. She wrote on a piece of paper and held it up to the camera. Ask about the dinner meeting in March. Sarah, I need you to think very carefully about this next question. In March, you had dinner with David Sterling where you discussed expanding the consulting arrangement. What exactly was discussed at that dinner? The silence stretched so long, I thought the call had been disconnected. When Sarah finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. How do you know about that dinner? I know about it because federal investigators know about it. It's documented in David's business records. What was discussed? David said his business was growing, and he needed more people to help with various projects. He asked if I thought any of my friends might be interested in freelance work. He said he could offer them similar arrangements to what I had. Did he explain what those arrangements would involve? He said they would be marketing and social media consulting like what I was doing. He said the pay would be generous because his clients valued discretion and professionalism. Margaret was shaking her head on the video screen, and I understood why. The federal prosecutors would interpret this conversation as evidence that Sarah knew she was recruiting people for a fraudulent scheme. Sarah, did David ever use the word discretion before that dinner? Had he ever suggested that the nature of your work required confidentiality? Yes, from the beginning, he said his clients were high-net-worth individuals who valued privacy. He said that's why the payments came through DS Consulting rather than directly from the clients. I looked at Margaret, who was now taking notes rapidly. The picture that was emerging was of someone who might have been genuinely deceived initially, but who had continued to participate even after receiving signals that something wasn't entirely legitimate. Sarah, one final question. Did you ever have any doubts about the legitimacy of the work you were doing for David? This time the pause was even longer. When she answered, I knew we had reached the moment of truth. Sometimes I wondered why the projects never seemed to have measurable results. I would create social media campaigns and marketing materials, but I never saw them implemented anywhere. When I asked David about it, he said his clients preferred to handle implementation internally. But you continued to accept the payments? Yes. Even though you had doubts about whether the work was real? Yes. Margaret muted her microphone and showed me a written note. She needs to stop talking now. Anything else she says could be used against her. Sarah, don't say another word to anyone about this situation until you meet with prosecutors tomorrow. And whatever you do, don't contact David Sterling. Federal agents are monitoring all his communications. After ending the call, I turned to my assembled advisors. What's the verdict? Margaret unmuted her microphone. She's going to face criminal charges. The combination of recruitment activity and continued participation, despite obvious red flags, makes it very difficult to argue that she was an innocent victim. Patricia closed her folders. The good news is that she appears to be a small player in a much larger scheme. If she cooperates fully and provides information about Sterling's operations, prosecutors might be willing to negotiate reduced charges. Robert's voice came through the speaker. Juliette, you need to prepare for the possibility that Sarah will be arrested and face significant prison time. We need to discuss guardianship arrangements for Emma and James. As my advisors gathered their materials and prepared to leave, I walked to the window and looked out at the city lights. In the past week, my life had transformed from comfortable retirement to complex legal crisis management. But for the first time in years, I felt fully alive, fully engaged with a challenge that required all my skills and experience. Tomorrow, Sarah would face federal prosecutors. Within days, she would likely be arrested. My grandchildren would need stability and protection while their family imploded. And I would need to ensure that the consequences of their parents' poor judgment didn't destroy their futures. The battle to protect my family was just beginning, and I was ready to fight it with every resource at my disposal. The next morning, I woke at 5:30 to find Emma standing beside my bed, clutching her stuffed elephant and looking worried. Grandma Juliette, why are Mommy and Daddy acting so scared? James had a bad dream, and he's asking for Mommy. I pulled her into bed beside me, wrapping my arms around her small, warm body. Sometimes grown-ups have to deal with complicated problems, sweetheart. But I want you to know that no matter what happens, you and James will always be safe and loved. Are Mommy and Daddy getting divorced like Tommy's parents? The intuition of children never ceases to amaze me. I don't know yet, Emma. But if they do, it doesn't mean they love you any less. And it definitely doesn't change how much I love you. After breakfast and getting both children settled with educational television programs, I received a call from Margaret. Juliette, Sarah met with federal prosecutors this morning. She's agreed to full cooperation, but they're still planning to file charges. The best we can hope for is house arrest instead of detention pending trial. What's the timeline? Formal charges will be filed early next week. Sarah will be arrested, arraigned, and then we'll know about bail conditions. You should prepare Michael and the children for the reality that Sarah might not be coming home for a while. I looked at Emma and James, innocently absorbed in their cartoons, and felt a familiar surge of protective determination. Margaret, I need you to prepare guardianship paperwork immediately. If Sarah is detained, I want legal authority to make decisions for the children while Michael sorts out his life. That's probably wise. Michael's going to be dealing with his own emotional crisis, and the children will need stability. After ending the call, I realized I needed to have the most difficult conversation of my life with my son. I called him and asked him to come over while the children were napping. Michael arrived looking like he hadn't slept in days. His usually neat appearance was disheveled, his eyes red-rimmed with exhaustion and stress. Mom, what's happening? Sarah came home from meeting with some federal prosecutors, and she's been crying and packing boxes ever since. I led him to my office and closed the door. Sit down, sweetheart. What I'm about to tell you will change everything about how you understand your life for the past 18 months. I explained everything. The federal investigation, Sarah's involvement in money laundering, the likelihood of criminal charges, and the probability that she would face significant prison time. With each revelation, I watched my son's face change from confusion to disbelief to something approaching devastation. This can't be real. This has to be some kind of mistake. Sarah isn't a criminal. She's just someone who made some bad choices about our marriage. Michael, this is very real, and it's going to get worse before it gets better. Sarah has been unknowingly participating in a criminal conspiracy for over a year. Federal prosecutors don't file charges unless they're confident they can prove their case. He put his head in his hands. What about Emma and James? What happens to them if Sarah goes to prison? That depends partly on you and partly on decisions we make right now. I placed the guardianship documents on the desk in front of him. I need you to sign these papers giving me temporary legal guardianship of the children. It doesn't remove your parental rights, but it gives me authority to make decisions about their care, education, and medical needs while you deal with the legal and emotional fallout. You want to take my children away from me? I want to protect your children while you figure out how to rebuild your life. Michael, you're about to face divorce proceedings, potential financial liability from Sarah's criminal activity, and the challenge of being a single father to 2 traumatized children. You're going to need help, and you're going to need time to get stable. He looked up at me with something that might have been relief mixed with shame. I don't know how to do this alone, Mom. I don't know how to explain to Emma and James that their mother might go to prison. I don't know how to pay for lawyers and mortgages and everything else without Sarah's income, even if that income was what it was. You don't have to figure it out alone. That's why I'm here. But we need to be strategic about how we handle the next few weeks. I opened another folder and removed a detailed plan I had spent the morning preparing. Here's what's going to happen. First, you're going to sign the guardianship papers, and Emma and James are going to stay here with me for the next month while everything settles. Second, you're going to meet with Robert Fitzgerald tomorrow to discuss your legal options for divorce and protecting yourself from any financial liability related to Sarah's situation. I can't afford Robert Fitzgerald. I can. This is about protecting my grandchildren's future, and that means protecting their father from the consequences of their mother's poor judgment. I continued down the list. Third, you're going to start therapy with Dr. Hartwell immediately. Not couples therapy this time, but individual counseling to help you process what's happened and develop coping strategies for what's coming. And fourth, you're going to quit your current job and come work for me. Michael looked stunned. Work for you? Doing what? I'm starting a family office to manage our investments and charitable activities. You have an MBA in finance, and you understand the importance of protecting family assets. I need someone I trust completely to help me restructure everything in light of recent events. Mom, I appreciate the offer, but I can't take charity from you. This isn't charity, Michael. This is a job offer with a salary of $120,000 annually, plus health benefits and a retirement plan. It's work that needs to be done, and you're qualified to do it. The fact that it also solves your immediate financial problems is simply good family planning. For the first time in days, I saw something like hope in my son's eyes. What would I be doing exactly? Managing investment portfolios, overseeing charitable giving, coordinating with attorneys and accountants, and helping me develop long-term financial strategies for the family trust. Real work that requires real skills that you possess. And Emma and James? They'll attend the private school 3 blocks from here. They'll have stable routines, consistent care, and protection from the media attention that will inevitably follow Sarah's arrest. During your therapy sessions and work hours, they'll be with me. Evenings and weekends, they'll be with you. We'll create a schedule that gives them maximum stability during a very unstable time. Michael was quiet for several minutes, processing the implications of what I was offering. This is really happening, isn't it? My wife is going to prison, my marriage is over, and my children are going to grow up knowing their mother is a criminal. Your wife made choices that have consequences. Your marriage was already over, you just didn't realize it yet. And your children are going to grow up knowing that their father and grandmother protected them when they needed protection most. I reached across the desk and took his hand. Michael, I need you to understand something. The past few days have been terrible, but they've also been necessary. We've discovered the truth about situations that were already destroying our family. Now we can deal with reality instead of living with lies. How do I tell Emma and James what's happening? We tell them together, age appropriately, focusing on what will stay the same rather than what's changing. They don't need to know about criminal charges or federal investigations. They need to know that Mommy has to go away for a while to deal with some problems, but that Daddy and Grandma Juliette will take care of them. As Michael signed the guardianship papers, I felt the familiar satisfaction of putting protective structures in place for the people I loved. The next few months would be challenging, but we would face them with honesty, legal protection, and financial stability. That evening, as I helped Emma and James with their homework at my dining room table, I realized that the apartment felt more alive than it had in years. The sounds of children's voices, the organized chaos of family life, the sense of purpose that came from being truly needed. This was what I had been missing during my lonely retirement. Sarah's arrest would happen within days. The media attention would be intense but brief. The legal proceedings would take months to resolve. But my grandchildren would be safe, my son would rebuild his life, and our family would emerge stronger from this crisis. The luxury babysitter had become the family's guardian and protector, and I was just getting started. 3 days later, Sarah was arrested at 6 a.m. as she prepared breakfast for the children. I had arranged for Emma and James to sleep at my apartment that night, so they were spared the trauma of watching federal agents handcuff their mother. Michael called me from the courthouse, his voice hollow with shock despite our preparations. "It's real now, Mom. She's being held without bail until the hearing on Monday. The prosecutor said she's a flight risk because of her connection to Sterling, who apparently has offshore accounts in 3 countries. How is she handling it?" She looked terrified, completely broken. I almost felt sorry for her until I remembered that she chose this path. That afternoon, I received an unexpected call from someone I hadn't spoken to in nearly 2 years. Linda Sterling, David's wife. Her voice was shaky but determined. "Mrs. Davenport, this is Linda Sterling. I believe our families have become connected through some very unfortunate circumstances. Mrs. Sterling, I'm sorry we're meeting under these conditions. How are you and your children coping?" "We're not, honestly. David was arrested yesterday, and I've just learned that our entire life has been built on criminal activity, but I'm calling because I think we might be able to help each other." This was an unexpected development. "What do you mean?" "I've been cooperating with federal investigators for the past 6 months. I discovered David's affairs and illegal activities last year and have been gathering evidence with FBI assistance. I have recordings, documents, and financial records that prove your daughter-in-law was genuinely deceived about the nature of her work." I sat down slowly, processing the implications. "You've been working undercover against your own husband?" "My husband destroyed our family and put my children at risk. But more importantly, he used innocent people like Sarah to legitimize his criminal enterprise. I can prove that she believed she was doing legitimate consulting work. What do you need from me?" "I need someone who understands the legal system to help me navigate the civil asset forfeiture process. The government is seizing everything. Our house, cars, bank accounts, even my children's college funds. I have proof that some of those assets came from legitimate sources before David started his illegal activities, but I need legal representation that I can't afford." I made a decision that surprised even me. "Mrs. Sterling, would you be willing to meet with me this afternoon? I think we might indeed be able to help each other." 2 hours later, Linda Sterling sat in my living room, looking remarkably similar to how I had felt a week ago. A woman whose entire life had been revealed as an illusion, forced to rebuild everything from scratch. She was younger than me, perhaps 45, with the kind of quiet strength that comes from surviving prolonged deception. "I want to show you something," she said, removing a tablet from her purse. "This is a recording from March 15th, the night David had dinner with Sarah. I had begun secretly recording his phone calls and meetings by then." She played an audio file, and I listened to David Sterling's voice with growing amazement. "Sarah, I need you to understand that the work you're doing is completely legitimate. These are real clients with real marketing needs. The reason I use DS Consulting as an intermediary is to protect their privacy and provide them with plausible deniability if their competitors try to steal their strategies." Sarah's voice responded, "I appreciate the discretion, David. I just want to make sure I'm providing real value for the money you're paying me." "You absolutely are. In fact, I'd like to expand your role. I have some colleagues who could benefit from similar marketing support. Would you be comfortable referring people who might be interested in this kind of consulting work?" "Of course. I know several people with marketing backgrounds who might be interested." Linda paused the recording. "There are 6 hours of similar conversations. David was very careful to maintain the illusion that everything was legitimate. Sarah genuinely believed she was doing real work for real clients. This could change everything for Sarah's legal situation. That's why I'm here. I want to help her, but I also need help myself. The government wants to seize assets that I can prove came from David's legitimate business activities before he started the illegal operations. I need an attorney who can separate the clean money from the dirty money. I thought about the strange turns this situation had taken. A week ago, I had been focused on family betrayal and marital problems. Now I was dealing with federal investigations, criminal prosecutions, and the opportunity to help another family destroyed by the same man who had manipulated mine. Linda, I'm going to make you an offer. I'll provide legal representation for your asset recovery case through my attorney, Robert Fitzgerald. In exchange, you'll provide all your evidence about Sarah's innocence to her defense team. That seems more than fair. There's something else. After this legal situation resolves, you're going to need to rebuild your life and support your children. I'm starting a family office operation, and I need someone with financial investigation skills. Would you be interested in employment that uses your experience with uncovering hidden assets and fraudulent activities? Linda looked stunned. You'd offer me a job after everything my husband has done to your family? Your husband's crimes aren't your responsibility, but your skills at uncovering those crimes are exactly what I need to protect my family's assets going forward. You've spent months learning how to trace hidden money and identify fraudulent schemes. That makes you incredibly valuable to someone who manages significant wealth. What about my children? They're 15 and 17, and they're devastated by their father's arrest. They can attend the same private school as Emma and James. We'll create a support network for all the children affected by this situation. As Linda left that evening with copies of the recordings that would likely save Sarah from significant prison time, I realized that David Sterling's criminal enterprise had inadvertently created an opportunity to build something positive from the wreckage. That night, I called Margaret Chen with an update that would change the entire trajectory of Sarah's case. Margaret, I have new evidence that proves Sarah was genuinely deceived about the nature of her work for Sterling. His wife has been recording their conversations for months, and it's clear that Sarah believed she was doing legitimate consulting. This could reduce her charges significantly. Instead of conspiracy, she might face only minor charges related to failure to report suspicious income. What kind of sentence are we looking at? With cooperation and evidence of genuine deception, probably probation and community service, plus restitution of the money she received. After hanging up, I walked to the guest room where Emma and James were sleeping peacefully, unaware that their mother's legal situation had just improved dramatically. Tomorrow, I would begin the process of rebuilding our family's life with honesty, legal protection, and a network of people who understood the importance of protecting children from the consequences of adult mistakes. The trap that David Sterling had set for innocent people had become the foundation for their recovery. His victims were becoming allies, his crimes were becoming evidence for justice, and his attempt to destroy families was becoming the catalyst for creating stronger ones. Justice was beginning to take shape, and it looked nothing like revenge. It looked like protection, redemption, and the careful construction of better futures from the debris of shattered lies. 1 week after Sarah's arrest, I received a call that I had been expecting but dreading. David Sterling's attorney, a slick corporate lawyer named Harrison Webb, requested a meeting to discuss mutually beneficial arrangements regarding the ongoing federal investigation. Mrs. Davenport, my client believes there may have been some misunderstandings about his business relationship with your daughter-in-law. He's interested in clarifying certain facts that might be beneficial to both families. I agreed to meet him at Robert Fitzgerald's office, ensuring that any conversation would be properly documented and legally protected. What Sterling didn't know was that Linda had already informed me of his strategy. He was planning to claim that Sarah had been a willing participant who had recruited other victims in exchange for higher payments. The meeting took place on a gray Tuesday morning in Robert's conference room overlooking Wall Street. Harrison Webb arrived with 2 associates and a briefcase full of documents, clearly expecting to intimidate a grieving widow into cooperation. Instead, he found me flanked by Robert, Margaret Chen via video conference, and Linda Sterling, whose presence immediately changed the dynamic in the room. Mr. Webb, I began before he could speak, I understand your client wishes to discuss Sarah Davenport's involvement in his criminal enterprise. Before we proceed, I want you to know that we have extensive documentation of your client's deception tactics and evidence proving that Sarah was genuinely unaware of the illegal nature of her work. Webb's confident expression faltered slightly when he saw Linda, but he pressed forward with his prepared strategy. Mrs. Davenport, I think you may have been misinformed about the nature of the consulting arrangement. My client has evidence that Mrs. Sarah Davenport was fully aware of the sophisticated nature of the business operations and actively participated in expanding the network of consultants. You mean she was aware that your client was running a money laundering scheme? I mean she was aware that discretion was required and that the compensation reflected the sensitive nature of the client relationships. Linda leaned forward and pressed play on a small recording device. David Sterling's voice filled the conference room. Sarah, I want to be completely clear about something. If anyone ever asks you about the nature of your consulting work, you should tell them exactly what I've told you, that you're providing legitimate marketing services for privacy-conscious clients. Because that's exactly what you're doing. There's nothing secretive or unusual about wealthy people wanting to keep their business strategies confidential. Webb's face went white. Where did you get that recording? From your client's wife, who has been cooperating with federal investigators for the past 8 months. Margaret's voice came through the video conference. We have over 12 hours of similar recordings proving that your client systematically deceived the people he recruited. I opened my own folder and removed a document. Mr. Webb, your client made a significant miscalculation. He assumed that the people he was manipulating were isolated and vulnerable. He didn't consider that they might have resources, connections, and the intelligence to fight back. What do you want? Webb asked, abandoning his negotiation strategy in favor of damage control. I want your client to provide complete information about everyone involved in his operation, particularly focusing on identifying other victims who were deceived the same way Sarah was. I want him to testify that Sarah and others like her were genuinely unaware of the criminal nature of their involvement. And in exchange, we won't pursue civil lawsuits for the emotional and financial damage your client has caused to our families. We won't seek additional damages for the trauma inflicted on minor children. And we won't provide the media with detailed information about how your client used romantic manipulation to recruit victims. Linda spoke for the first time since the meeting began. Mr. Webb, your client destroyed multiple families to fund his criminal activities. He used his victims' emotional vulnerabilities and financial needs to manipulate them into unwitting participation. The evidence we have doesn't just prove their innocence, it proves his predatory behavior. Robert placed another document on the table. This is a proposed cooperation agreement. Your client provides complete testimony about his deception tactics and identifies all victims who were genuinely deceived. In exchange, we limit our civil claims to actual financial damages rather than pursuing punitive damages that could reach into the millions. Webb studied the document for several minutes. I'll need to discuss this with my client. You have 24 hours, I said, standing to end the meeting. After that, we proceed with full civil litigation and provide all our evidence to journalists who have been very interested in this story. As Webb and his associates gathered their materials, I delivered one final message. Mr. Webb, please make sure your client understands something. The women he targeted aren't the vulnerable, isolated victims he thought we were. We're educated, connected, and extremely motivated to protect our families from the consequences of his actions. He can cooperate and minimize the damage, or he can fight us and discover exactly how resourceful we can be when our children are threatened. After they left, Linda and I sat in Robert's office, reviewing our strategy for the next phase of the legal proceedings. Do you think Sterling will cooperate? Linda asked. He doesn't have a choice. The evidence against him is overwhelming, and his only chance of avoiding maximum sentences is to demonstrate remorse and cooperation. But more importantly, we've just proven to federal prosecutors that Sarah and the other recruiting victims were genuinely deceived. Margaret's voice came through the conference call speaker. Juliette, based on what happened in that meeting, I'm confident we can reduce Sarah's charges to minor financial reporting violations. She'll likely face probation, community service, and restitution, but no significant prison time. What about the other victims Sterling recruited through Sarah? With Sterling's cooperation and the evidence Linda provided, we should be able to demonstrate that they were also deceived. This case is becoming a model for how to distinguish between criminal conspirators and manipulation victims. That evening, I sat with Emma and James as they worked on their homework at my dining room table. They had adapted remarkably well to their new routine, and their teachers reported that they seemed more stable and focused than they had been in months. "Grandma Juliette," Emma said, looking up from her math worksheet. "When is Mommy coming home?" "Soon, sweetheart. Mommy has been learning some important lessons about making better choices, and she'll be home when she's ready to be the best mommy she can be." "Will she still live with us?" "Mommy and Daddy are going to live in different places for a while, but you'll still see both of them regularly. Sometimes families need to change their arrangements to be happier and healthier." James, who had been quietly working on his reading, looked up with the serious expression that always reminded me so much of Michael at that age. "Grandma, are you going to take care of us if Mommy can't?" "I'm going to take care of you no matter what happens, James. That's what grandmothers do. We make sure our grandchildren are always safe and loved." As I helped them prepare for bed that night, I reflected on how much had changed in just 2 weeks. The family crisis that had begun with an insulting comment at dinner had evolved into a comprehensive restructuring of our lives, but the foundation was stronger now. We were building on truth instead of lies, protection instead of exploitation, and genuine care instead of manipulation. David Sterling's cooperation would come through within 24 hours. Sarah's legal situation would resolve favorably. Michael's new career would provide stability and purpose. And Emma and James would grow up understanding that families could survive even the most devastating betrayals if they were willing to fight for each other. The confrontation with Sterling's representatives had been our first victory, but it wouldn't be our last. We were just getting started. David Sterling's cooperation came through exactly as I had predicted, but with a revelation that none of us had anticipated. At 2 o'clock the following afternoon, Harrison Webb called Robert with news that would transform our understanding of the entire conspiracy. "Sterling wants to meet with Mrs. Davenport directly. He claims he has information about financial irregularities that go beyond his own operation, information that directly affects her family's trust assets." I agreed to the meeting, but only with Linda present and federal prosecutors listening via secure video link. We met at the federal courthouse in a small conference room typically used for plea negotiations. David Sterling looked nothing like the confident manipulator Sarah had described. 2 weeks in federal detention had transformed him into a hollow-eyed man who understood that his carefully constructed world had completely collapsed. "Mrs. Davenport," he began, his voice barely above a whisper, "I need you to know that Sarah genuinely believed she was doing legitimate work. I deliberately created false documentation and client scenarios to maintain that illusion." "We already know that, Mr. Sterling. What else do you have to tell us?" He looked at Linda with something that might have been remorse, then back at me. 3 years ago, when I was researching potential targets for the consulting scheme, I conducted background investigations on wealthy families in the area. Your family trust appeared in those investigations." "What kind of investigations?" "Financial vulnerability assessments. I was looking for families where the next generation might be susceptible to recruitment or manipulation." He paused, gathering courage for what came next. "During that research, I discovered irregularities in your trust's investment management that suggested someone else was already conducting unauthorized activities." My blood ran cold. "What kind of irregularities?" "Regular transfers to offshore accounts that don't appear in your quarterly investment reports, systematic skimming from dividend payments, asset valuations that don't match current market values." He looked directly at me. "Mrs. Davenport, someone has been stealing from your family trust for years, and they've been very sophisticated about hiding it." The federal prosecutor on the video link, Assistant U.S. Attorney David Park, leaned forward. "Mr. Sterling, do you have evidence to support these claims?" "I have the initial research files I compiled 3 years ago. I never acted on the information because I realized the family was already being victimized by someone with much better access than I could ever achieve." Robert was already taking notes rapidly. "Who has access to the trust investment accounts?" I felt the floor shifting beneath me as I realized the implications. "The trust is managed by Morrison & Associates, my former law firm. Specifically, it's handled by the Estate Planning Division under the supervision of—" The words died in my throat as the full scope of the betrayal became clear. "Under the supervision of whom, Juliette?" Robert prompted. "Jonathan Morrison, Charles's business partner, my former colleague, The man who has been managing our family assets for the past 4 years. Linda reached across the table and placed her hand on mine. The same man who would have detailed knowledge of your family dynamics and financial pressures. The same man who would know exactly how to manipulate the situation to avoid detection. David Park's voice came through the video link with the tone of someone who had just seen a case become much more complex. Mrs. Davenport, we're going to need to expand this investigation immediately. If your trust assets have been compromised, we're looking at potential additional charges for fiduciary fraud and breach of trust. I sat in stunned silence, pieces of a puzzle clicking into place with devastating clarity. Jonathan Morrison had been Charles's partner for 30 years. He had been a pallbearer at Charles's funeral. He had personally recommended that I retire early to focus on family. He had been managing our trust assets with complete discretion and minimal oversight. Sterling, I said, my voice steady despite the revolution happening in my mind. How much money are we talking about? Based on the research I conducted 3 years ago, approximately $2.4 million had been diverted at that time. Given the systematic nature of the theft, the current amount could be significantly higher. Robert was already dialing his phone. I'm calling for an emergency forensic audit of the trust accounts. We need to freeze all assets immediately pending investigation. As the federal prosecutors began coordinating with financial crime specialists, I found myself experiencing an emotion I hadn't felt since the night Sarah insulted me at dinner. The cold, calculating anger that had made me dangerous in hostile negotiations. Mr. Sterling, I need you to provide every document, every piece of research, every detail you have about Jonathan Morrison's activities. In exchange for this information and your testimony about Sarah's innocence, I'll support a cooperation agreement that could significantly reduce your sentence. Mrs. Davenport, I want you to understand something. When I researched your family, I wasn't just looking for financial vulnerabilities. I was studying family dynamics to identify potential emotional pressure points. The stress patterns in your family over the past few years, Michael's financial struggles, Sarah's increasing desperation, your increasing isolation, those weren't natural developments. Linda leaned forward. What do you mean? I mean someone has been systematically creating financial pressure on the younger generation while simultaneously positioning themselves as the trusted advisor to the family matriarch. Classic long-term manipulation designed to maintain access and control while avoiding suspicion. The full scope of the conspiracy was becoming clear. Jonathan Morrison hadn't just been stealing from our trust. He had been orchestrating family stress to ensure that I remained dependent on his financial management, while the younger generation became increasingly desperate for support. David Park, I addressed the federal prosecutor directly. What kind of cooperation would you need from my family to investigate and prosecute this expanded conspiracy? Complete access to all trust documents, financial records, and communications with Morrison and Associates. Testimony about the financial advice you received and the family circumstances that influenced your decisions. And patience while we conduct what could be a very extensive investigation. That evening, I sat in my home office, surrounded by boxes of financial documents that I hadn't reviewed in detail for years. Michael worked beside me, his new role as family financial manager making him the perfect person to help identify discrepancies and irregularities. "Mom, look at this," he said, holding up a quarterly report from 18 months ago. "The reported value of your technology stock portfolio is 30% higher than the actual market value of those holdings at that time. And this dividend payment," I replied, showing him another document. "It shows $68,000 received, but only $51,000 deposited to the trust account." We worked until nearly midnight, documenting evidence of systematic theft that totaled well over $4 million. But more importantly, we were building a case that would expose Jonathan Morrison as the architect of our family's financial and emotional manipulation. As I tucked Emma and James into bed that night, Emma asked me a question that showed how perceptive children can be. "Grandma Juliette, why do bad people always pretend to be good people?" "Because it's easier to hurt people who trust you, sweetheart. But it's also why good people have to be very careful about who they trust, and very strong when they discover someone has been lying to them. Are you going to stop the bad people?" "Yes, Emma. I'm going to stop all of them." The confrontation with David Sterling had revealed that our family crisis was even more complex than we had imagined. But it had also provided us with the information and evidence we needed to fight back against every person who had attempted to exploit our trust and vulnerability. Tomorrow, the real battle would begin. And this time, I would be fighting not just for my family's financial security, but for justice against every person who had tried to destroy us. The confrontation with Jonathan Morrison took place exactly 1 week later in the conference room where Charles and I had signed our wills 23 years earlier. The irony was not lost on me as I sat across from the man who had been systematically stealing from the very trust he had helped us create to protect our family's future. Jonathan arrived with his usual confident demeanor, carrying his expensive leather briefcase and wearing the kind of smile that had once made me feel secure about our family's financial future. He had no idea that federal agents were positioned throughout the building, or that every word of our conversation was being recorded by the FBI's white-collar crime division. "Juliette, my dear, you look wonderful. Retirement clearly agrees with you." He settled into his chair with the casual authority of someone who believed himself completely in control. "I understand there have been some family difficulties recently. I want you to know that Morrison & Associates is prepared to provide whatever support you need during this challenging time." I opened the folder in front of me and removed the first document. "Jonathan, I appreciate your concern. In fact, that's exactly what I wanted to discuss with you today. I've been reviewing our trust management arrangements, and I have some questions about recent investment performance." "Of course. I'm always happy to review our strategies and results. Let's start with something simple. According to your quarterly reports, our technology portfolio was valued at $2.8 million as of December 31st. However, according to independent market analysis, the actual value of those holdings was only $2.1 million. Can you explain the discrepancy?" For the first time, Jonathan's smile faltered slightly. "Market valuations can be complex, Juliette. We often use projected values based on anticipated performance rather than daily trading prices." "I see. And this dividend payment from our energy sector holdings. Your report shows $68,000 received, but bank records show only $51,000 deposited to the trust account. Where did the additional $17,000 go?" "There are management fees, transaction costs, and administrative expenses that are deducted before deposits. It's all detailed in the fine print of our service agreements." I removed another document. "This is our original service agreement from 23 years ago. Management fees are clearly stated as 1.5% annually, deducted quarterly. There's no provision for transaction costs or administrative expenses to be deducted from individual dividend payments." Jonathan was beginning to look uncomfortable, but he pressed forward with his explanations. "Fee structures have evolved over the years, Juliette. I'm sure there have been amendments to reflect current industry standards." "Show me the amendments." "I don't have them with me, but I can certainly provide copies for your review." "That won't be necessary, Jonathan. You see, I've already conducted a comprehensive audit of all trust activities for the past 4 years. I opened a thick folder and spread dozens of documents across the table. What I discovered is systematic theft totaling $4.3 million. The color drained from Jonathan's face, but he maintained his composure. "Juliette, I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding. Complex investment management can appear irregular to someone without expertise in current market practices. You're right that I lack expertise in current market practices. That's why I hired Deloitte and Touche to conduct an independent forensic audit of all trust activities." I placed their report on the table. They found evidence of systematic asset diversion, false reporting, and breach of fiduciary duty spanning 47 months. Jonathan's hand was trembling slightly as he reached for his water glass. "I'm sure any discrepancies can be explained and corrected. These kinds of accounting irregularities happen in complex portfolios." They also found something else interesting, a pattern of financial pressure being applied to my family members that correlates directly with periods of increased trust asset diversion. I looked him directly in the eyes. "You didn't just steal from us, Jonathan. You orchestrated our family's financial stress to ensure that we remained dependent on your management and too distracted to notice what you were doing." "That's a very serious accusation, Juliette. It's a very serious crime, Jonathan. Michael's employment difficulties, the mortgage crisis that led to my supporting his housing costs, Sarah's desperation that made her vulnerable to David Sterling's manipulation, how much of that was natural circumstance, and how much was carefully orchestrated pressure. For the first time, Jonathan's facade completely cracked. You have no idea what kind of pressure I've been under. The firm has been struggling for years. Client expectations, regulatory compliance costs, competition from larger firms. I did what I had to do to keep everything afloat. You stole $4.3 million from the family that trusted you most. I borrowed against assets that were performing well. I always intended to replace everything when the firm's situation improved. With what money, Jonathan? The firm is declaring bankruptcy next week. The SEC investigation into your client asset management practices will be announced publicly tomorrow morning. His face went completely white. How do you know about the SEC investigation? Because I'm the one who reported your activities to federal authorities, along with David Sterling's evidence and my own forensic audit results. I stood up and walked to the window, looking down at Wall Street where Charles and I had built our careers on the principles Jonathan had betrayed. You know what the most pathetic part of this is, Jonathan? You could have simply asked for help. Charles and I would have provided financial support to keep the firm stable. We would have restructured our arrangements to ensure everyone's survival. You would have demanded control over firm operations. You would have forced changes that would have destroyed our independence. We would have provided support while maintaining the firm's dignity and reputation. Instead, you chose theft and manipulation, destroying both the firm and multiple families in the process. I returned to the table and sat down. Here's what's going to happen now, Jonathan. In approximately 10 minutes, federal agents are going to arrest you for wire fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, and money laundering. The evidence is overwhelming, and there's no possibility of avoiding conviction. Juliette, please, think about our friendship, our history together. Think about what Charles would have wanted. Charles would have wanted his family protected from people like you. Charles would have wanted his trust honored by someone with integrity. I leaned forward, using the same voice that had terrified opposing counsel for decades. You violated every principle Charles stood for when you decided to steal from his widow and orphaned grandchildren. What about the firm? What about the other employees who depend on Morrison and Associates for their livelihoods? The other employees will be offered positions with firms that have agreed to absorb Morrison and Associates' legitimate client relationships. The clients who weren't being robbed will have their assets transferred to reputable management companies. And the families you victimized will receive restitution from the liquidation of your personal assets. As if on cue, the conference room door opened and 3 federal agents entered with arrest warrants. Jonathan Morrison, Charles's partner of 30 years, the man who had delivered the eulogy at my husband's funeral, was handcuffed and read his rights in the same conference room where we had planned our family's financial future. As they led him away, he turned back one last time. Juliette, I'm sorry. I never meant for things to go this far. You're not sorry for what you did, Jonathan. You're sorry that you got caught. After he was gone, I sat alone in the conference room, processing the magnitude of what had just transpired. In 3 weeks, I had discovered and dismantled 2 separate criminal conspiracies that had been targeting my family. The luxury babysitter had become a force for justice that none of her enemies had anticipated. My phone buzzed with a text from Michael. Mom, the news is reporting Jonathan's arrest. Are you okay? I typed back, I'm perfect, sweetheart. Justice has been served, and our family is finally safe. That evening, as I helped Emma and James with their homework, I reflected on how completely our lives had transformed. Sarah would be home within a month, having received probation and community service for her unwitting involvement in David Sterling's scheme. Michael was thriving in his new role, managing our recovered assets. The children were stable, protected, and growing stronger every day. But most importantly, I had rediscovered who I was beneath years of comfortable retirement and family accommodation. I was Juliette Davenport, and people who threatened my family did so at their own considerable peril. The luxury babysitter was gone forever. In her place stood a woman who would never again be underestimated or taken for granted. 6 months later, I stood in the living room of my penthouse apartment, watching Emma and James play with their new puppy while Sarah and Michael discussed custody arrangements with the calm professionalism of two people who had learned to prioritize their children's welfare above their own grievances. The scene would have been unimaginable during that devastating dinner conversation that had started everything. Sarah looked healthier than she had in years. Her 3 months of community service at a financial literacy nonprofit had given her both purpose and perspective. More importantly, her cooperation with federal prosecutors had helped identify 12 other families who had been victimized by David Sterling's operation, leading to a comprehensive victims' compensation fund. "Juliette," Sarah said, approaching me with something that might have been genuine gratitude, "I wanted to thank you again for everything you've done. Not just the legal support, but the way you protected Emma and James when I couldn't protect them myself. You're their mother, Sarah. Despite everything that happened, that hasn't changed. My job was to ensure they remained safe, while you learned to make better choices. I know I can never fully apologize for what I put this family through. The things I said to you, the way I treated you, there's no excuse for any of it." I studied her face, looking for signs of the calculated manipulation that had once characterized our interactions. Instead, I saw something I hadn't expected: genuine humility mixed with hard-earned wisdom. "Sarah, the person who said those things to me doesn't exist anymore. The woman standing here now understands the difference between accepting help and exploiting generosity. That's a lesson worth learning, even if it came at a very high cost." Michael joined our conversation, carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing the confident expression of someone who had discovered his own capabilities. His new role managing the family office had revealed talents he hadn't known he possessed, and his therapy sessions with Dr. Hartwell had helped him process the trauma of discovering that his entire marriage had been built on deception. "Mom, I just got off the phone with Robert. The final restitution payment from Jonathan's asset liquidation came through this morning. We've recovered 97% of the stolen funds, and the remaining 3% will be covered by insurance claims and civil settlements. The trust is actually in better financial condition than it was before the theft began." I walked to the window and looked out at Central Park, where families were enjoying a beautiful Saturday afternoon. It's remarkable how much stronger things can become when you rebuild them with complete honesty. Linda Sterling appeared in the doorway, carrying a laptop and wearing the focused expression that had made her invaluable as our head of financial security. Her investigation skills, honed during months of uncovering her husband's crimes, had evolved into a sophisticated operation that protected multiple high-net-worth families from financial fraud. "Juliette, I have the quarterly report on our fraud prevention protocols. We've identified and prevented 3 separate attempts to compromise client assets this quarter, including one scheme that would have targeted the Morrison & Associates client base if the firm hadn't been dissolved." "Excellent work, Linda. How are your children adjusting to their new school?" "They're thriving. Amanda made honor roll, and Kevin was accepted to the early admission program at Columbia. They both understand that their father's mistakes don't define their futures." As I watched Linda work with Michael on financial projections while Sarah helped Emma with her homework, I realized that the destruction David Sterling and Jonathan Morrison had intended to cause had instead created something neither of our families could have achieved alone: a support network built on mutual protection and shared values. The doorbell rang, and Patricia arrived with her usual armload of investigative files. Her private investigation business had expanded dramatically as word spread about her role in unraveling the Sterling-Morrison conspiracies. She now specialized in protecting families from financial predators, using the same skills she had once applied to corporate fraud cases. "Juliette, I have some interesting news about David Sterling. He's been cooperating so extensively with federal investigations that his sentence was reduced to 8 years instead of 25. Apparently, his information led to the arrest of 17 other individuals involved in similar schemes. And Jonathan Morrison? 15 years, no possibility of parole. The judge specifically noted that his betrayal of fiduciary trust was particularly egregious given the length of his relationship with your family." That evening, after everyone had gone home and the children were asleep, I sat in Charles's favorite chair with a glass of wine and reflected on the extraordinary transformation of our lives. The attack on our family had revealed not just the presence of enemies we hadn't suspected, but the existence of strength and resources we hadn't known we possessed. My phone buzzed with a text from Margaret Chen. Juliette, congratulations on the Times article about your family office's fraud prevention work. You've become quite the celebrity in legal circles. The article had been published that morning, detailing how a retired grandmother had dismantled 2 criminal conspiracies and created a new model for protecting family wealth from sophisticated fraud. The journalist had been particularly impressed by our victim support network and the employment opportunities we had created for other families affected by financial crimes. But what gave me the most satisfaction wasn't the public recognition or the recovered assets. It was the sound of Emma's laughter as she played with her puppy, the confidence in Michael's voice as he discussed investment strategies, and the genuine peace in Sarah's expression as she rebuilt her relationship with her children. The woman who had been dismissed as nothing more than a luxury babysitter had become the architect of justice, protection, and redemption for everyone whose lives had been touched by betrayal. The family that had nearly been destroyed by lies and manipulation had emerged stronger, more honest, and more connected than ever before. As I prepared for bed that night, I stopped by the guest room where Emma and James were sleeping. Emma stirred as I adjusted her blanket. "Grandma Juliette," she whispered, "are the bad people all gone now? All the bad people who were trying to hurt our family are gone, sweetheart. And we've learned how to protect ourselves from any new bad people who might try to hurt us in the future. Because you're really good at stopping bad people? Because we're really good at taking care of each other, Emma. That's what families do." The luxury babysitter had died that night at dinner 6 months ago. In her place stood Juliette Davenport, protector, investigator, employer, and guardian of a family that would never again be vulnerable to the predators who mistake kindness for weakness. The keys I had placed on the table that night had unlocked far more than a house. They had unlocked the truth about who I really was and what I was capable of when the people I loved were threatened. And anyone who chose to threaten my family in the future would discover that Juliette Davenport was a force they had never imagined and would never forget.